Hi everybody, welcome. What we're going to be talking about in this video is how to hide columns from certain users within SharePoint lists and libraries. So before we go any further, I'll just tell you a little bit about 3Grow. We're a SharePoint and Office 365 specialist training organization offering classroom training throughout Asia Pacific. We also offer online remotely delivered training as well. And a little bit about myself. I'm Russ. I'm Managing Director of 3Grow based in Melbourne. I've been teaching for over 17 years. The last 12 or 13 of those years have spent specializing in SharePoint and Office 365 and in in-text tools and so on. So what we're going to be doing during this video is first of all have a look at an overview of column level permissions within SharePoint. We'll then have a look at what I've done already as a setup for the demonstration, and then we'll go through the demonstration itself. So I guess the first thing to point out is the title of the video is a little bit misleading. Technically, there is currently no such thing as column level permissions in SharePoint. The way we get around this is by splitting data into separate lists. So for example, sensitive information would sit in a second list, and we can then lock down the permissions of that list only to certain people. The same would apply to a document library, where we can store additional metadata about those documents in a separate list. And then what we do is connect those two lists together via lookup columns. So what I've done so far to set up the demonstration, I've created a list within a SharePoint site named Contractors. This is the list that will be visible to everybody within the team. I based this list on the standard contacts list template and then removed any columns that weren't required. I've also then created a contractor ID column so that will act as the lookup column within the second list, which is contractors' personal information. This list will have its permissions locked down so that only site owners can access that list. Again, it was based on the contacts list template that comes out of the box with SharePoint, and I again removed any unnecessary columns. So the next steps is we're going to create the contractor ID lookup column within the contractor's personal information list. We're then going to lock down the permissions of the contractor's personal info list so that only site owners can view that list and its contents. What we can then do is use audience targeting to hide the link to the contractors list from the site owners. Now, of course, they'll still have permissions to view the list, but it's just a case of tidying up that navigation. What we will find is that we'll need to activate the classic SharePoint server publishing infrastructure feature at the site collection level in order to manage the navigation links to that degree. So here within the HR site, as I mentioned, I've already created the contractors list. This is the list that will remain visible to everybody within the team. Then I've created a contractor's personal info list, which, as we said, is going to then be locked down so that it's only visible to the site owners. And this is where we can store the more sensitive information, such as their home phone number and address. So the first thing we're going to do is create a lookup column within this list so that we can associate an item from the original contractors list with each of the records within the contractor's personal info. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm creating this column as a local list column. In many scenarios, it may be preferable to use site content types and therefore site columns for this purpose. So into the list settings, and here below the list of existing columns, we're going to create a column simply called contractor ID. As we said, this is going to be a lookup column. Now we're going to ensure that each record within the contractor's personal info list does have a contractor ID property, and we're also going to enforce unique values. This ensures that we don't have two sets of personal information against the same contractor. We're then going to choose which column from the contractors list is going to act as the lookup value, and that's going to be the contractor ID. Now what we're then going to do is choose which columns from the contractors list we want to pull through for use in the contractor's personal info list. This will allow site owners to view all of the information in one place rather than going to one list to see the core information, then another list to see the personal information. So we're going to choose last name, first name, company, email address, job title, and mobile number. OK to confirm. Then back in the contractor's personal info list, we'll then see each of those columns has been pulled through into the view. Against each of these sets of personal information, I'm then going to choose the appropriate contractor. Notice that then pulls through the information from the original contractor list. Notice that if I try choosing the same record again, it will tell me the value already exists within this list. Now that's the result of the Enforce Unique Values option I chose when creating the lookup column. You'll notice that the names of the columns that are being pulled through from the original contractor list are labeled contractor ID, which is of course the name of the lookup column, colon, followed by the name of the field from the contractors list. Each of these columns can have their names modified within the list settings. To change the name of the columns, simply click to open up the column settings, and we can then simply modify column name here. We can then reorder the columns into something that's a bit more logical. The easiest way to do that is from the drop down of any column, column settings, show or hide columns. That will open up this pane down the right hand side. We can then reorder the columns by simply dragging and dropping within this right hand pane. Another way to adjust the column order is to drag and drop those columns in situ. For example, I can pull the last name over to here. What we'll then find is that if any of the information is updated within the original contractors list, that information will then flow through into the contractor's personal information. For example, let's say that John Smith gets married and changes his name. We can choose to edit that item and change that to John Jones. We can then go through to the contractor's personal info list and we'll see that information has flowed through. The next thing to do is to lock down the permissions of the contractor's personal info list to ensure that only site owners are able to view its contents. To do this, within the contractor's personal info list, we go to the cog, into the list settings, and then into permissions for this list. On the toolbar, we can then stop inheriting permissions and then simply remove the permissions of HR team, leaving only HR owners. Of course, as the site owner, I will still see both of those lists. However, if I open up another browser where I'm logged in as a student account, who is one of the HR team and not a site owner, you'll see that that list isn't available via the quick launch. If we go to site contents, we don't see it here either. As a site owner, I will still see both of those links. Now, what you may want to do is tidy the navigation by removing the contractors list from the quick launch bar, because of course that information is all easily visible through the contractor's personal info list as well. To hide the navigation link from certain users, this requires some additional settings that we don't get by default within a standard SharePoint team site in SharePoint Online. By going to Site Information and View All Site Settings, the only option we have to manage the left navigation is this Quick Launch option. Now, of course, we can remove the link, but that will remove it for everybody, which you don't want to do. So instead, here under Site Collection Features, I'm going to activate a feature known as the SharePoint Server Publishing Infrastructure feature. It's a bit of a mouthful. This will just take a few moments to activate. However, whilst that's processing behind the scenes, I can still go back to site settings and we'll see some changes starting to take place. Now, having refreshed the site settings page of the HR site, we'll now see the navigation option, which is a more comprehensive means of managing navigation rather than the basic quick launch bar option we saw a moment ago. If we scroll down to the structural navigation, here we'll see what's referred to as the current navigation. By current navigation, it's referring to the quick launch bar. What we can then do is edit the contractors link and set the audience as being the HR team. OK to confirm. OK to save the navigation settings. So now I've targeted that link only to the site owners. You'll see it's now being removed from view in the left navigation, but only for the site owners. The HR team will still see that link. So if we go back into Firefox as student 3, refresh the page, and the link remains. So the HR team are able to open the list to view general contractor information, whereas as a site owner, I'm able to open up the contractor's personal information list and see the core information plus the more sensitive information as well. I hope you found that video useful. If you have any feedback or have any requests for any other videos you'd like to see, please feel free to get in touch.